We have talked about the future of relations between Europe and Africa, but we must hear more specifically about the relations between France and Africa and between France and Senegal. The links that unite our continents are made up of a complex history, shaped by stories intertwined with suffering and aspiration. It is very difficult to talk about the future without making a few incursions into a past that is not necessarily reliable. Africa, the cradle of humanity, has often been the stage of unfair exploitation, dictated by external interests. Today, we find ourselves in a decisive turn where the need to reevaluate these historical patterns and to promote a fair partnership is necessary, with an unprecedented urgency. I chose this stage to emphasize the imperative to adopt a nuanced and inclusive approach in our analysis of relations between Africa and Europe. Too often, simplistic discourses hide the richness of past and present interactions between our continents. Recognizing the mistakes of the past while seizing the opportunities for future collaboration constitutes a moral and political imperative. We must also show clarity in the face of contemporary challenges that challenge our intercontinental exchanges. Crucial issues such as migration, fair trade, and of course, economic partnership agreements. The fight against racism, security, technology transfer, and climate change requires a concerted and resolute approach. And only a shared desire for dialogue and authentic partnership will allow us to overcome these challenges and build a better future for our peoples. This, Mr. President, implies a frank dialogue based on mutual respect and the recognition of the legitimate aspirations of each nation for sovereignty and sustainable development. I would like to salute the distinguished presence of this delegation from France, Insoumise, under your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the architects of our common destiny. Together, we have the power to build a future where relations between Africa and Europe are based on justice, solidarity, and mutual respect. Allow me also to highlight the importance beyond politics of the role that intellectuals, artists, civil societies, and diasporas must play in this dynamic of partnership and cooperation. Intellectuals, as guardians of knowledge and critical thinking, have the responsibility to stimulate debates and propose innovative ideas to shape a common future. Artists, through their creativity and expression, have the unique power to cross borders and build bridges between cultures. Their art can serve as a universal language to promote mutual understanding and encourage empathy between African and European peoples. Civil societies, as the voice of collective consciousness, are the guarantors of human rights, social justice, and democracy. Their active commitment can contribute to strengthening transparency and responsibility in decision-making processes, ensuring that citizens' interests are at the heart of African-European relations. Finally, African diasporas, in Europe as elsewhere, constitute living bridges between our continents. Their economic, cultural, and social contributions provide unique opportunities to strengthen ties between our societies. Together, we can build a future where cooperation, mutual respect, and solidarity are the keywords of our relations. This requires a collective commitment and an unwavering desire to work together to face common challenges and seize the opportunities that arise. This is a message that continues to be a screen and a transmission channel throughout Europe and throughout the rest of Europe, including in European institutions. These relations have not always been based on equality, on equity, on mutual respect. These relations so far have been leonine relations to the detriment of Africans in the African continent. We only forget one thing. A large part of the money that is in our wallet is in the wallet of Westerners, of Europeans in particular, of Africans, who have been exploited for centuries in Africa. Not only that, but many of them have been exploited in Africa. So we need to have a little bit of common sense. I'm not talking about generosity, common sense justice, to give Africans, I would say, what they have been given, especially since it is necessary if we want to avoid pure convulsions and difficulties, with the political consequences that this brings in the near future. I made a quote that could be linked to the most radical African activists, but which actually comes from the former president of France. I name Mr. Jacques Chirac. It surprises more than one, and I think that President Mélenchon himself is not informed, and it is a knowledge, certainly late, but it is a historical truth that of exploitation for centuries and in different ways from one continent to another, which could justify a large part of the wealth of one of these continents to the detriment of the other. The relations between the West and Africa are made of several centuries of history, of a singular ambivalence. The one between France and Senegal does not derogate it. These relations have led to feelings of love and disloyalty, of pride and guilt, of credulity and skepticism, feelings that manifest and express themselves truly, variably according to times and contexts. They have been singularized for some time by what is called anti-Western feelings or anti-French feelings, expressed by a large number of African public opinions. This state of affairs is often imputed by the majority of the ruling elite. I mean the majority of the ruling elite. You are not part of it, obviously. By the majority of the Western ruling elite, more wrongly than rightly, the activism of a new populist elite, which is us, is a shortcut that must be found in the face of phenomena. And the shortcut that has been found to explain this feeling is that Africans would be manipulated by new powers, Russia, China, and so on. It is born today on the continent of new political regimes. This infantilizing reasoning does not correspond to reality. We have gone beyond the time when Africans could be manipulated by some people, by some regimes. And this feeling that is manifested from independence to now, each generation has known its share of activists who carry the same inappropriate and destructive for Africa and its relations with the rest of the world that is often corrupted, and the ambiguous relations that Europe maintains with it, the security threats, the emergence of new opportunities for cooperation, but obviously the multiplying effect of social networks. Today, Africa, the majority of its elites, its youth, its diaspora, have been corrupted in a Foucauldian version of its relations with Africa. With France, for example, I do not know that we, our political movement, when I say France, I speak of those who govern France today. I speak of President Macron and his regime. We do not speak of the French people with whom we have a long and rich history, and I do not speak of all the French political elites or civil society. I speak of the current governing elite. I do not ignore that for them we have been, and perhaps we still are. Despite our democratic election by the Senegalese, two movements in a terrorist, Islamist, violent, populist, anti-Western, pro-Russian leader. I do not speak of you. You share this fate with me. It is obvious, Mr. Mélenchon, that I do not complain because the French good thing you are does not escape this categorization. The truth is that many European and singularly French are uncomfortable with our sovereignist and have set themselves as the objective of the intervention. This is what certainly is the violent persecution of the regime of President Macky Sall against our political party and its members.
Monsieur le Président Macron, je voulais dire cher Jean-Luc, ce tableau semble assez sombre.
Mr. President Macron, I would say, dear Jean-Luc, this picture seems quite dark. I say this because during the whole period of persecution, extremely violent against a whole political movement in Senegal, which caused the death of more than 60 people, thousands of injured, more than 1,000 political prisoners. You have never heard the French government denounce what happened in Senegal. You have never heard the European Union denounce what happened in Senegal. And even worse, it is at the worst of these persecutions that President Macron welcomed President Macky Sall to congratulate him for having done what was necessary to save his country. It is an incitement to repression, an incitement to persecution and the execution of Senegalese who had no crime but to have a political project that was mainly that of Senegalese. And what confirms it is the election from the first round to the second round. I would like to make a clarification. The words I am advancing are the words of Ousmane Sonko, president of the Passive Party. It is obvious that our current position, consisting of the fact that we have led the destinies of this country, Senegal, will lead us to collaborate with all the states of the world
et donc le gouvernement de
including the French state and therefore the government of Emmanuel Macron.
Mais je peux également assurer que les
But I can also assure that the postures and positions that we have defended as opponents will be exactly the same in the future.
aujourd'hui connaîtront. Cher Jean-Luc Mélenchon, vous et votre mouvement,
You told us yesterday that you did not want that by your silence on what is happening here in Senegal.
qu'on recadre les choses. Je crois que vous êtes ici dans le cadre
That this silence be the pretext of a generalization of this perception to all the French political elite and beyond all the French people that you wanted to be by your commitment not on the side of passive and the Senegalese people,
pour la défense de la démocratie.
but by the defense of democracy and truth. You wanted to be this other voice of France.
L'accueil qui vous a été réservé ici au Sénégal.
The welcome you received here in
Vous
Senegal
assurez que vous avez été cette autre voix de la France que nous avons entendue.
must assure you that you were this other voice of France, not the other voice.
Voilà
So,
donc, M. Mélenchon,
here you are, Mr. Melanassin, here in Dakar,
terre d'hospitalité,
the land of
terre de
Africa,
liberté et terre de paix,
the land of hospitality,
pour échanger avec nous
the land of liberty,
l'avenir des relations entre
and the land of peace, to talk to us about the future of relations between Europe.
cette relation que j'ai décrite plus haut. Jusqu'à présent, c'est passé
Until now, it has been as we know it.
D'abord, par le passage à la
First,
douloureuse-
through the
par le
painful
passage
experience of the slave
à la
trade,
douloureuse épreuve de la traite négrière,
then the colonization that our countries went through,
que nos pays ont vécu, et aujourd'hui,
and today what is convenient to call neo-colonization.
néocolonisation. Beaucoup plus vicieuse, beaucoup plus pernicieuse,
Much more vicious, much more pernicious, but certainly much more impactful on the fate of our populations.
nous avions presque cru, nous y avons presque
And yet, we almost believed it when President Macron declined the new African doctrine of the Élysée.
Cette nouvelle doctrine qui devait consister au refus de
This new doctrine, which had to consist of the refusal of all political support to authoritarian regimes. This is what happened.
Et j'ai bien aimé toute expression.
And I also like the expression where you said that we had to participate in all the
Nous
fights
devions participer à et vous disiez que nous devions participer à tous les
on the
combats
basis of a very simple principle.
sur la base d'un principe très simple. Je me mêle de tout. avec
I
les
want to
mêmes
mix
principes.
everything with the same principles.
Malheureusement,
Unfortunately, everything does not mix with everything with the same principles.
avec les mêmes principes. Je m'en
I
veux
mean, for example,
ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. On a tout fait de condamner,
what is happening today?
d'exclure, de mettre des embargos.
We have done everything to condemn, to exclude, to put embargoes.
Il est inadmissible que des Africains
What we are condemning ourselves. It is unacceptable for Africans to be subject to ostracism and exclusion on African soil.
en terre africaine
It is not acceptable.
qui se disent adeptes de
For those who say they are adepts of liberalism and who do not necessarily respect the rules of the European
pas pour
Union.
autant que ces pays sont mis.
It is not for the same reason that these countries are put in this position.
Pourquoi faudrait-il que des problèmes politiques
Why should political problems in Africa be solved by the Africans by attacking brotherly countries and their populations
à des pays
above all?
frères et à leur population surtout?
We cannot accept it.
Et c'est nos frères du Sahel.
And it is to protect our Sahel brothers.
Et nous ferons tout ce qu'il faut pour raffermir les liens
And we will do everything we can to close the links and bring them our solidarity.
ceux qui aujourd'hui condamnent
Those who today condemn regimes considered military or dictatorial regimes
sont pourtant enclins à aller dans
are
d'autres
still inclined to go to other regimes that are not democratic
lorsque leur intérêt s'y trouve.
when their interest is to negotiate oil or markets. Can we say that from this moment on, they mix everything with the same principles?
Avec les mêmes principes. Absolument pas.
Absolutely not.
Les problèmes internes au pays doivent être
Internal
réglés
problems in
par
the
les
country
citoyens
must be
du pays.
solved by the citizens of this country.
Certes, il y a eu des coups d'État.
Certainly, there have been coups d'etat,
Encourage la commission de coups d'État.
and certainly no one encourages the commission of coups d'etat.
Et qui refuse d'analyser les causes réelles et
But I refuse to be those who analyze the symptoms and who refuse to analyze the causes.
Je voudrais dire, Monsieur le Président Mélenchon, que c'est ces
I would like to say, Mr. President Mélenchon,
ambivalences dans les prises de position.
that it is this ambivalence in the polls that has ended up discrediting a good part of the West,
Bonne partie de l'Occident. Et
and in this case, Europe and France,
l'Europe et la France, au regard de tous ces peuples africains,
in the eyes of all these African peoples who today go to the same schools,
suivent de la même manière l'actualité mondiale et sont aussi éveillés que tout autre peuple.
follow the same way the world news, and are as aware as any other people in the world. And this has ended up negatively affecting the relations between Africa and Europe.
Refonder ces relations parce que nous sommes
We must reestablish these relations because we are committed to them.
Qu'avons-nous proposé jusqu'à présent, nous, Africains?
What have we been offered so far, us
Bien
Africans?
sûr, j'ai toujours dit que je n'impute pas tous les mots.
Of course, I have always said that I do not impute all the words that bind us to external responsibilities.
Les détournements de deniers publics ne sont pas de la
The
responsabilité
detournments of the last public are not foreign responsibility. It is the irresponsibility and the bulimia of our elites.
Les mauvais
The
choix
bad choices of
politiques
public
publics,
policy,
même s'ils sont dictés par des institutions
even if they are
internationales,
dictated by international institutions,
ne sont que de la
are only the
responsabilité
responsibility of our own
de nos
elites.
propres. Je puis vous assurer que personne, rien ni personne,
I can assure you that no one, nothing or no one, whether in the bilateral or multilateral framework,
à nous, les politiques
will impose on us the policies that we have been given.
Et donc, nous allons développer ici
And so we are going to develop here some axes that seem important to us.
des propositions, des offres,
Proposals, offers, ideas on what should be able to restart this cooperation on better terms than it is now.
Mais avant, je présenterai brièvement le modèle qui est le nôtre.
But first, I will briefly present the model that is ours. We came to power with the model that we have presented in Senegal for 10 years. We have not been elected because we have machines to distribute money to an electorate.
Pour distribuer à un électorat, non. Nous avons élu
We have been elected on the basis of a program, a project, a vision,
et de manière synthétique. C'est quoi?
and in a synthetic way. What is this
Pour
vision?
nous, l'Afrique peut et doit avoir une
For us, Africa can and must be an important locomotive of global growth.
Pour cela, elle n'a prioritairement besoin
For this, it does not need a treatment of favor or an infantilizing approach,
d'une approche infantiliste,
as has been the case so far.
comme ce fut le cas jusque-là. Elle n'a pas besoin d'un modèle une dette mal maîtrisée et libellée
It does not need a model for a debt ill-managed and liberalized in foreign currency, or an influx of direct foreign investment exclusive to the national private sector, which among other things generates a fixed exchange rate.
du fait, entre autres, d'un taux de change fixe.
We have been talking for years.
On nous parle,
Poverty has not ceased to gallop.
la pauvreté n'a pas cessé de galoper, le chômage n'a pas cessé
Unemployment has not ceased to rise, because this growth is not made by and for Africans.
Tel est le schéma
This is the
auquel
path that the African continent is subject to, in particular by the ambient liberalism which has reduced them to marginal status in their own continent.
dans leur propre continent. Les conséquences sont sans appel. Comme je
The
l'ai dit,
consequences are unappealing. As I said, destabilization, political crisis, and clandestine emigration.
et immigration clandestine. Et repose sur une mobilisation optimale
It is based on an optimal mobilization of endogenous resources first.
dans un état de droit et un environnement de liberté
In a state of law and an environment of economic freedom,
au secteur privé, national
which is
d'abord,
conducive to the national private sector first. Small and medium African companies must be aware of the growth by their financial inclusion in a country which is not limited to a single currency.
Par leur inclusion financière dans une
In this model, countries bring financial, technological, and market resources.
dans ce modèle donc en apportant
In this
des
perspective,
compléments de ressources
France,
financières,
Europe must and can remain main partners or even privileged partners of Senegal and Africa.
la France,
There are advantages in the relationship between the two continents and between your country and ours. These advantages are undeniable. We are not here to make absolute nihilism. The first advantage is that we share this culture or this thirst for democracy and freedom of people.
notre pays et le nôtre. Ces atouts sont indéniables.
I believe that Senegal has demonstrated over the years, despite the crisis we have gone through,
Le premier atout,
that it is a people very attached to its freedom and democracy. We also share a history. Senegal, France, Africa, Europe are several centuries of history whose architectural vestiges are still very visible in all the urban centers of the country. Centuries of history that have gone through painful or shared ordeals, but which also create a link to nothing comparable. We also share the language you have spoken to the point that this language belongs to those who speak it
l'Europe, c'est plusieurs siècles d'histoire.
and who are mostly on the African continent. We share this option under the pretext of our firm option to work on the promotion and development of our national languages. We also share an institutional and legal body. One of the solid heritages of this history lies in the similarity of institutional and legal systems in use in our countries, which simplifies and stimulates labor relations, professional mobility of liberal professions, for example.
Nous partageons cette option
Here in front of me is Matre Tam, lawyer in Paris in Dakar, Senegal. We also share experience. Geographical proximity, the closest continent to us is the European continent, and for Senegal, mutual attention. All these elements are prerequisites if we know how to give the right orientation to the context and time. What are the boundaries to be given? We have an extraordinary progression in our relations in the field of technology, artificial intelligence, as we said earlier, energy efficiency and ecological transition, investments in all fields.
les rapports de travail
I am talking about direct investments. So many modern issues for which the African countries have to rely on the European partner on top of the classical fields that challenge us. The problem of immigration that we don't want, that we don't want, that we don't want, that we don't want. Let's denounce this phenomenon more than ourselves. Let's denounce the elite of our youth at the expense of the age that perishes in the oceans. The problem of good governance is that of industrialization that is ineluctable.
tous ces éléments sont des prérequis.
Let's denounce these points since I have already done so. But I don't want to be too long on technology, energy efficiency, immigration issues, and good governance.
Quels sont les contours qu'il faut lui donner? Nous avons une marque
That I will address a little because malgovernance and poverty are the bed of these morbid attempts to codify the so-called clandestine immigration by the few people. I said once that in reality, immigration is a natural phenomenon as old as the world.
investissements dans tous les domaines. Je parle des investissements directs.
It can be justified simply because, first of all, this is where they are settled, and secondly, that others have come to take away their wealth, and they follow the same path as their wealth. And I insist that above all, the solution is not in immigration, and that today what all peoples have done to make their country what it has become our challenge is here in Africa. The monetary issue that seems fundamental to us because, as I said, a country has transformed, and this extraordinary youth that you see is waiting for a lot of us. And it is for this that we will do this in agriculture.
Révolution industrielle qui est inéluctable.
This in industry, this in the supply of basic necessities. This is not the most problematic for our countries. It is to go and find the means where they are, and our means are enormous, but they escape us. Among the levers and an instrument of sovereignty, you talked about sovereignty.
Parce que la malgouvernance et la pauvreté
Imagine for a second that France can have no state worthy of this name must subcontract its money. And as an example, the day before the Normandy, when Winston Churchill told the Americans to impose on France, after the liberation to impose on France after the liberation, a new administration, a currency called billet drapeau. General Picard had a black anger. You knew his anger. He said, make war with your false currency. This bill only circulated for a short time in Normandy, 2 or 3 months, from June to August 1944, before being definitively withdrawn.
prélever les richesses et ils suivent le même chemin que les richesses. Et je persiste.
Here is what we said about the monetary question in our book. I said that we opt without equivocation for a careful exit from this exempt system because the central banks are afraid of any change to maintain this reserve rate, compress our economies, and reduce the internal activity by limiting monetary emissions.
Notre challenge se trouve ici, en Afrique.
What we propose is to restore to the currency its functions of listening and financing of the economy by the formulation of the supply of production to the export and to the internal consumption, the support to industrial policies, and I go on and on.
Et cette extraordinaire jeunesse que vous voyez,
And that's why today, in our option to strengthen our national financial market by various levers, among which foreign investors to start a local currency. Imagine that African countries borrow a foreign currency and are exposed to the market fluctuation. Almost no African country can borrow a local currency, and this must stop because we suffer the consequences.
c'est d'aller chercher
And what we also want is a flexible currency with at least 2 currencies, which can even help to amortize exogenous shocks and accompany our competitiveness to export. I can't do all the developments on the monetary issue, but if I talk about it, it's that every time an African non-politician raises the monetary issue, he becomes the incarnated devil. We don't have the right to talk about our own currency. We never debate it in Parliament. We refuse to debate it on television, and yet you can debate the euro on the French National Assembly.
aucun État digne de ce nom.
And that's why we are debating it, we are imposing it. And I think that in the community, the latest developments that we have, we are moving surely towards the reforms, and the other element is security.
Débarquement de Normandie, lorsque Winston
The presence of foreign military bases in Senegal, this presence of military bases arouses legitimate questions. More than 60 years after our independence, we have to question the reasons why the French army, for example, still benefits from several military bases in our countries, and the impact of this presence on our national sovereignty and our strategic autonomy. The recent history, I like to take examples of France itself. The recent history of France is rich in interesting anecdotes on the problems and the issues of nuclear weapons. Between 1956 and 1958, you are historians, and I am not. I can be wrong about the dates and even about the facts. But between 1956 and 1958, that is to say, after the Second World War, the Americans had the project to install on French territory a stock of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles.
une sortie prudente de ce système exsangue, car les banques centrales
The project later on the double question of command and control of the missiles, whose deployment was admitted by the French military as a good way to increase the dissuasive power of NATO. The French Air Force then judged unacceptable the principle according to which the French Air Force, as soon as it came to power, General de Gaulle again, during the defense meeting of June 7, 1958, warned that these weapons had to be under French control
Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui,
and that France claimed the right to give its opinion in the triggering of a possible nuclear war under all conditions. And in 1956, General de Gaulle commissioned France to withdraw from NATO, which had a dozen military bases in France, and the consequence we know it, and justified this decision by the will of France to dispose of itself, a will that is incompatible with a defense organization in which it is subordinated.
l'Américain presque ne peut s'endetter en devise
I reiterate here that it is incompatible with the sustainable presence of foreign military bases in Senegal. This does not question the defense agreements. We maintain defense agreements with many countries, the United States, Great Britain, even China. I believe many countries we can have defense agreements without it justifying the occupation of Dakar today by foreign garrisons. The fourth point is the fair gain on our own natural resources.
Mais si j'en parle, c'est que
We said it earlier, the model we want to rely on an optimal mobilization of endogenous resources. We say thank you to all our partners. The European Union is the first in terms of development aid. 51% of development aid comes from the European Union, 20% of the Union itself, and 80% of the bilateral framework. This is a good thing, but if you put in parallel or in contradiction,
pourtant vous,
this aid compared to what we lose in the real economic that can be judged through the exploitation of our natural resources, through the clauses of the public markets exploited on the country, I can assure you that we lose 10 times more or 20 times more than the European Union. This is the only issue.
purement vers ces réformes que nous souhaitons tant,
The delicate and tenuous issue of mass unemployment is that our countries organize themselves in addition to the mobilization of fiscal resources and import rights, in addition to the monetary issue that must allow us to have a currency adapted to our economic realities, in addition to the fight against corruption that makes us lose a lot.
cette présence de bases militaires
It is also the renegotiation of all the conventions that were signed in a Leonid way, and that today, at the level of legal clauses, financial clauses, and technical clauses, are at the detriment of our people. I can say here, and you didn't know we were promised, the impact this wealth can have on a people. You go to countries like Qatar that 30 or 40 years ago, we only registered tents in the desert. You see what it has become with the good use of their natural gas. But if we don't take our responsibilities, I can assure Senegalese that in the next 15 or 20 years, Senegal will not gain, because our partners, if they are really partners, must encourage, accompany this process of rebalancing the gain that everyone must have in the management of their natural resources.
et 1958.
Yes, we accept that an investor who has taken risks, who has invested, must win and have a return on investment. We lose everything and we gain almost nothing.